He had it all, a billion-dollar empire, a name that commanded respect, and a stunning fiancée who was the envy of society. Damian Blackwood was about to announce his marriage, cementing a legacy of power and success. The future was written in gold, but in the span of a single heartbeat, his entire world would come crashing down. It wouldn't be a market crash or a business rival that destroyed him. It would be the face of a woman he thought he'd never see again, the hired chef for his engagement party, and the two small children standing by her side, one of whom had his own eyes. The air at the Blackwood estate in the Napa Valley Hills was thick with the scent of money-blooming night jasmine and self-congratulation. Damian Blackwood stood on the marble terrace, a flute of vintage Dom Perignon cool in his hand, his gaze sweeping over the glittering assembly. Every titan of industry, every venture capitalist with a Midas touch, and every society swan from San Francisco to Los Angeles was here. They had come to celebrate him, to celebrate them. He felt the delicate touch of a hand on his arm and turned. Isabel Sterling smiled up at him, her beauty as sharp and flawless as the 10-carat diamond he had placed on her finger. Her dress, a column of silver silk, by a designer whose name was a password into the highest echelons, clung to her frame. She was perfect, an asset, a partner who understood that their marriage was not just a union of hearts, but a merger of dynasties. "They're all watching you, darling," she murmured, her voice a low purr. "They're waiting." Damian nodded, a practiced charming smile gracing his lips. Let them wait a little longer. Builds anticipation. But as he looked past her, into the dazzling lights and the sea of expectant faces, a familiar hollowness echoed in his chest. He had climbed the mountain. From a cramped apartment in San Jose to this sprawling palace of glass and stone, he had conquered the tech world with a ruthlessness that was legendary. He had everything he had ever fought for. So why did it feel like he was standing in an exquisitely decorated empty room? He pushed the thought away. It was pre-wedding jitters. Nothing more. He was 35 years old, the CEO of Blackwood Dynamics, a man on the cusp of a powerful marriage. This was the pinnacle. This was victory. "The catering is exquisite," Isabel noted, gesturing vaguely towards the army of black and white-clad staff moving silently among the guests. "I was worried about hiring a lesser-known company, but their lead chef, this Esther Vance, came with impeccable, if quiet, recommendations." The name meant nothing to him. He was about to reply when his chief of staff, a perpetually flustered man named Peterson, appeared at his elbow. "Mr. Blackwood, it's time. The press is positioned, and everyone is waiting for the announcement." Damian drained his champagne. "Showtime." He led Isabel to a small raised platform at the edge of the terrace, overlooking the valley below. A microphone stood waiting. The chatter of the crowd hushed, turning into a collective, respectful silence. He tapped the microphone, the sound booming softly through the state-of-the-art speakers. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice calm and commanding. "Thank you all for joining us tonight. For years, my focus has been singular, building a legacy, creating something that lasts." He paused, turning to smile at Isabel, who basked in the adoration of the crowd. "But a legacy built alone is just an empire of one. I've come to realize that the greatest success is one that is shared." He was in his element now, the words flowing as smoothly as a rehearsed keynote speech. He spoke of the future of merging the Blackwood and Sterling names, of shared ambitions and a brilliant horizon. His eyes roamed the audience, acknowledging a nod from a banking magnate here, a smile from a political donor there. His gaze drifted towards the back, near the elaborate food stations where the catering staff worked tirelessly. A woman was directing her team, her back to him. She had her hair pulled back in a simple no-nonsense bun, a few stray wisps of light brown hair escaping to frame her neck. There was something about her posture, the set of her shoulders, the efficient way she moved, that snagged his attention. And so he continued his rhythm, faltering for just a fraction of a second. "It is my profound honor and my greatest joy to announce." The woman turned, then her eyes scanning her staff to ensure everything was perfect. For a brief moment, her gaze swept past the stage past him, and Damian's world stopped. The air left his lungs. The perfectly crafted words of his speech evaporated from his mind, replaced by a roaring silence. The faces of the crowd blurred into a meaningless watercolor wash. It couldn't be. The woman was older, her face etched with fine lines of exhaustion and worry that hadn't been there before. She was thinner too, but it was her. The same hazel eyes that could flash with fire or soften with love. The same gentle curve of her lips. Esther. His Esther. The woman he had loved with a desperate, all-consuming passion. The woman he had erased from his life 7 years ago with a single brutal check and a command to disappear. He swayed on his feet, his hand gripping the lectern for support. Isabel shot him a concerned, questioning look. The crowd began to murmur. He had stopped mid-sentence, but Damian couldn't see them. He could only see her. She hadn't recognized him yet. She was focused on her work, a world away from the man on the stage. And then his world tilted again, irrevocably and catastrophically. A little boy, no older than 6, ran up to Esther, tugging on her pristine white apron. "Mommy, I'm thirsty," he said, his voice small but clear enough to carry in the sudden lull. Esther's face transformed, the professional mask, melting away to be replaced by a look of pure maternal love. She knelt down, brushing a stray lock of dark hair from the boy's forehead. "I know, sweetie. Just a minute, okay, Leo? Go stand with Maya." She pointed to a quiet corner near the kitchens where a little girl with wide, curious eyes stood clutching a stuffed rabbit. But Damian wasn't looking at the girl. He was staring at the boy, at Leo, at the boy's dark, wavy hair, so much like his own, at the determined set of his jaw, a perfect mirror of the one Damian saw in the mirror every morning. At his eyes, not the hazel of his mother's, but a deep, piercing blue. Damian Blackwood's eyes. The microphone slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the platform with a screech of feedback that made the entire party jump. Isabel gasped his name. The crowd stared bewildered. Damian saw none of it. He was locked in a silent, screaming freefall through time. 7 years ago, a vicious fight, accusations, a final cruel dismissal. "Take this and build a life where you're not dragging me down." He had thrown away his past to build this golden future. And now his past was standing 30 feet away, holding the hand of a son he never knew existed. The millionaire, the titan, the conqueror, was about to marry his lover. But his heart, his legacy, his entire reality had just been served to him on a silver platter by his ex-wife, the chef. And he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that nothing would ever be the same again. The screech of the fallen microphone was a physical blow, snapping the spell of the perfect evening. Isabel grabbed Damian's arm, her manicured nails digging into the fabric of his Tom Ford suit. "Damian, what is it? Are you ill?" Her voice sounded distant, submerged under the roaring in his ears. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the scene by the kitchens. Esther, alerted by the noise, had looked up. Her eyes finally met his. For a moment, there was nothing, just a flicker of confusion. Then recognition dawned, and it was like watching a beautiful vase shatter in slow motion. Her face went deathly pale. The warmth vanished, replaced by a stark, brittle shock. She instinctively pulled her son, Leo, behind her, a protective gesture that was as primal as it was revealing. "Peterson," Isabel hissed, her voice sharp with panic. She was a master of damage control. "Get him off the stage, now! Tell them he's feeling unwell, a sudden migraine." Peterson and a security guard were already moving, flanking Damian, their presence a firm, guiding pressure. "This way, sir," Peterson urged, his face a mask of professional calm. Damian allowed himself to be led away, his legs moving on autopilot. He cast one last look over his shoulder. Esther was already gone, vanished back into the chaos of the kitchens, the two children spirited away with her. It was as if she had been a ghost, a hallucination, brought on by stress and champagne. But the image of the boy of his son was burned onto the back of his eyelids. They hustled him into the library, a vast two-story room, lined with leather-bound books he'd never read. Isabel shut the heavy oak doors, and the muffled sound of the party died away. "What in God's name was that?" she demanded, her voice losing its polished edge, replaced by a raw, furious tremor. "You looked like you'd seen a ghost. You humiliated me, Damian, in front of everyone." "The chef," he said, his voice hoarse, unrecognizable to his own ears. "The chef, Esther Vance." "What about her?" Isabel snapped. "Did she poison the canapes? She's my ex-wife." He breathed the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. Isabel froze. All the color drained from her face, leaving her stunning features looking sharp and skeletal. "You're... what? The shy girl from college you mentioned once? The one who couldn't handle your ambition? That's her." He didn't answer. He was pacing the room like a caged panther, his mind a maelstrom of fractured memories and impossible questions. Esther, here, after all these years, he had built walls around that part of his life, convincing himself that the past was a foreign country to which he could never return. "And the children," he whispered, stopping to face Isabel, his eyes wide with a terrifying, dawning certainty. "Did you see the boy, Isabel? Did you see his eyes, understanding, cold and dreadful, washed over her?" "No," she said, shaking her head as if to deny the very possibility. "No, it's not possible. You would have known." "Would I?" Damian shot back, a bitter, hysterical laugh escaping him. "I gave her a cashier's check for $250,000 and told her I never wanted to see her or hear from her again. I told her to start over. It seems she did." The weight of it crashed down on him. A son. He had a son. A living, breathing piece of him had been in the world for 6 years, and he hadn't known. The hollowness he'd felt earlier on the terrace was no longer a vague echo. It was a gaping, screaming void that threatened to swallow him whole. "This is a disaster," Isabel said, her mind already shifting from shock to strategy. "A scandal. We have to get her out of here. Pay her off. Whatever it takes, Peterson." She yanked the door open. "Find the head chef, the Vance woman. Tell her there's been a change of plans. Her services are no longer required. Have her and her entourage removed from the property immediately. Use the service entrance. No one is to see her." "No," Damian said, his voice low and firm. Isabel stared at him. "What did you say?" "I said no," he repeated, stepping forward. The fog of shock was beginning to clear, replaced by a cold, sharp resolve he hadn't felt since his early days of building his company from nothing. "She's not going anywhere." "Are you insane?" Isabel shrieked. "She's your past, Damian, a past that has two inconvenient secret children attached, our merger, our future. Everything we've built is predicated on a clean image. This is a dirty little secret that will ruin us." "Then let it ruin us," he said, the words surprising him as much as they did her. "I am not throwing her out. Not until I get some answers." He strode out of the library, leaving Isabelle standing agape, her perfect mask of composure finally cracking. He stalked through the corridors of his own home, his mind a single burning laser of intent. The kitchen. He had to find her. The main kitchen was a symphony of controlled chaos. Chefs, chopped sauces simmered, and servers rushed in and out. He saw her in a small adjoining pantry, frantically packing away supplies into boxes. Her two children were there, huddled in a corner. The little girl, Maya, was crying softly, while the boy, Leo, stood in front of her, his small body rigid, his blue eyes glaring at anyone who came near. He looked like a tiny sentinel, guarding a fortress. Esther looked up as Damian entered, and she flinched. "You need to leave," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "We are leaving. Just give us a few minutes to pack our things." "Leaving?" Damian's voice was dangerously quiet. "You can't leave. We need to talk." "There is nothing to talk about," she said, refusing to meet his eyes, her hands stuffing napkins into a box with shaking fingers. "You made your position perfectly clear 7 years ago, Damian. A conversation is 6 years and 11 months too late." "Leo," he said, the name feeling foreign and yet intimately familiar on his tongue. How old is he?" "He's 6, she replied curtly, a wall of ice in her voice. Damian did the math. A knot of cold dread and furious regret tightened in his gut. The fight. The final terrible night. It had been just before he closed the Series A funding that launched his company into the stratosphere. He had accused her of holding him back, of not believing in him. She had cried, telling him he was becoming someone she didn't recognize. He had walked out. A week later, he'd had the check delivered by a courier. He had been so sure he was right. So sure she was an anchor. "He's mine, isn't he?" he asked the question, a raw wound. Esther finally stopped packing. She slowly straightened up and met his gaze. Her hazel eyes were not soft and loving anymore. They were the eyes of a warrior, hardened by years of solitary struggle. She corrected him, her voice lethal. She gestured to the little girl who peeked out from behind her brother. "Her name is Maya. She's 5. They are twins." Twins. The word struck him with the force of a physical blow. He staggered back, his hand finding the doorframe to steady himself. Not one child, 2. 2 children he had fathered and abandoned without ever knowing. "They are my children," Esther continued, her voice shaking with a rage that had been simmering for 7 long years. "I carried them. I gave birth to them alone in a hospital in Oregon. I worked 3 jobs to feed them. I was their mother and their father while you were on the cover of Forbes talking about your legacy. You don't get to waltz in here 7 years later and claim any part of them. You forfeited that right when you paid for my silence." Before he could respond, the pantry door swung open. It was Isabel, her face a thundercloud of controlled fury. She took in the scene, Damian pale and shaken, Esther defiant and proud, the 2 small children staring with wide, frightened eyes. "The party is ruined," Isabel said, her voice dripping with venom. "I am upstairs trying to salvage our reputation, and I find you in a pantry with this." She waved a dismissive hand at Esther and the children. "I told you to get rid of her." "They're not going anywhere," Damian said, finding his voice again. He stepped forward, positioning himself slightly between Isabel and Esther. It was an unconscious protective move that did not go unnoticed by either woman. "Fine," Isabel sneered, a cruel glint in her eyes. "Let her stay. Let the whole world find out that the great Damian Blackwood has a secret, impoverished family he hid away. Let's see what the Sterling family board members have to say about that when we ask for their approval on the merger." It was a direct threat. His future, his company, his relationship, all of it held hostage. The old Damian, the ruthless CEO, would have capitulated. He would have written a bigger check, signed a non-disclosure agreement, and buried this secret so deep it would never see the light of day. But the man standing in the pantry was no longer that man. In the space of 30 minutes, he had been fundamentally broken and remade. He looked at Leo, who was still glaring at him with his own defiant blue eyes. He looked at Maya, who was clutching her bunny, her lower lip trembling. And he looked at Esther, the woman he had loved and destroyed, who had survived and raised two miracles in the ashes of the life he had burned down. "Peterson," Damian called out into the kitchen, his voice ringing with an authority that made everyone freeze. "Prepare the North Guest House. Get Mrs. Vance and her children settled in for the night. See that they have everything they need." A collective gasp went through the kitchen staff. Isabel looked at him as if he had just stabbed her. Esther's head snapped up. "What? No, absolutely not. We are leaving." "You are not," Damian stated, his gaze unwavering. "You are not leaving this estate until I understand everything." He then turned his full attention to Isabel, his voice dropping to an icy calm. "And you will go back out to that party, and you will tell our guests that I was called away on a sudden, urgent business matter. You will handle it. That is what you're good at, isn't it? Handling things." It was a dismissal, as cold and final as the one he had given Esther 7 years ago. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the pantry, leaving the two most important women in his life, his past and his future, staring at each other in a stunned, supercharged silence, the battle for Damian Blackwood's soul having just begun. The North Guest House was a miniature version of the main estate, a 2-bedroom jewel of architecture with its own infinity pool and a view of the sprawling vineyards. To Esther, it felt like the most luxurious prison ever constructed. She had argued, she had protested, but Damian's quiet, implacable orders, backed by a team of staff who followed them without question, had left her no choice. Her beat-up sedan was still in the service parking lot, but she felt as if Damian had taken the keys to her entire life. The first morning was a study in unbearable tension. A lavish breakfast was delivered, but no one ate. Esther stared into a cup of coffee, her mind racing. Leo refused to sit at the table, choosing instead to stand by the large glass doors, a silent, brooding guard. Maya, sensing the stress, pushed a piece of cantaloupe around her plate with her fork, her expression mournful. Just after 9, Damian appeared. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was dressed in jeans and a simple black t-shirt, a look so reminiscent of their early days together that it made Esther's heart ache with a phantom pain. He looked tired, as if he hadn't slept at all. "Good morning," he said, his voice gentle. It was a tone she hadn't heard in almost a decade. Esther didn't respond. Leo took a half step forward, placing himself between Damian and his mother. You should go, the little boy said, his voice small but steady. You're upsetting my mummy. Damian stopped his eyes, fixing on the boy. He didn't look angry, he looked astonished. He crouched down slowly so he was on Leo's level. You're right, Damian said softly. And I'm sorry for that. You're a good man, looking out for your mom. He glanced at Esther. He's brave. The simple compliment disarmed her for a second. He's had to be, she replied, the bitterness creeping back into her tone. Damian's gaze was filled with a pained self-recrimination. He turned his attention to the little girl. And what's your rabbit's name? He asked Maya. Maya hid behind her chair, clutching her stuffed animal tighter. She whispered, Barnaby. Barnaby. Damian repeated with a small, sad smile. That's a very fine name. He stood up, sensing he was making no headway. Esther, can we please talk alone? She looked at her children, then back at him. Fine, 20 minutes. She led him out to the patio, the cool morning air, a welcome relief from the suffocating atmosphere inside. For a long moment, they stood in silence, looking out at the valley. Why? Damian finally asked, his voice raw. Why didn't you tell me, Esther, all these years? You could have called. You could have written. You knew what I should have done. Esther let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of humor. Done what, Damian? Flown in on your private jet and played the doting father for the cameras. Written a bigger check. You made it perfectly clear you wanted a life free of anchors. You told me I was dragging you down, that my small dreams were incompatible with your destiny. And then you sent a check like you were settling a bad business deal. You didn't just end our marriage, you tried to erase it. Why on earth would I invite that man into my children's lives? Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, and every one of them hit its mark. He flinched, remembering the cruel, ambitious young man he had been. I was wrong, he whispered. I was an arrogant fool. I was so terrified of failing that I pushed away the only thing that ever mattered. You weren't a fool, you were cruel, she corrected. And you weren't just pushing me away, you were listening to someone else. Damian frowned. What are you talking about? Mark, she said, naming his former best friend and original business partner, Mark Renshaw. The week before our final fight, he came to see me. He told me you were under incredible pressure and that I needed to give you space. He said I was distracting you, that my calls and my worries were making you lose focus. He made me feel like I was the villain in your story. Damian's blood ran cold. He and Mark had had a bitter falling out 3 years ago over the company's direction. Mark had wanted to cash out. Damian had wanted to build an empire. Damian had bought him out for a fraction of what his shares would later be worth, and they hadn't spoken since. Mark spoke to you? Damian asked, a new dark suspicion forming in his mind. He told me that you were considering a major sacrifice to secure the final round of funding. Esther continued, her voice trembling with the memory. He made it sound like you were thinking of leaving me for someone more connected. He planted a seed of doubt, Damian. So when you started that fight, when you said those horrible things, a part of me believed it was because you'd already replaced me. A lie, a manipulation. It had all been built on a lie. Damian's memory flashed back to that final week. Mark had been the one feeding him stories too. Vague, poisonous whispers. I saw Esther having coffee with that professor again. She looks happier with him. She told my wife she's not sure she can handle the pressure of being married to someone like you. Be careful, man. Don't let anything get in the way of this deal. He had been insecure, driven, and terrified. Mark had played on his deepest fears, painting Esther as a liability. At the exact moment Damian was most vulnerable. He had engineered their breakup. But why? The answer hit Damian with the force of a physical punch. The initial Series A funding. The lead investor had been notoriously old-fashioned, a man who believed a CEO should have a stable home life. But there was a clause, a key man clause, that also had a morals component. A messy divorce or scandal could have jeopardized the deal. If Mark could get rid of Esther before the deal closed, she would have no claim. If Damian divorced her after, she would have been entitled to a significant portion of his initial shares. Mark hadn't just wanted Esther out of the way emotionally, he had wanted her out of the way financially. He had wanted more of the company for himself. Oh my God, Damian breathed, stumbling back against the railing. He lied. He lied to both of us. Meanwhile, in the main house, Isabel Sterling was not handling things. She was waging a war. She had spent the night on the phone with her father and two of the most ruthless private investigators money could buy. "I want everything on her," she had hissed into her phone. "Esther Vance. Every job she's had, every dollar she's earned, every man she's dated since she left him. I want her tax records, her credit score, her children's birth certificates. I want ammunition, and I want it by noon." By 11 a.m., she had a preliminary file. It painted a picture of struggle and dignity that to Isabel's eyes looked like a litany of failures. Community college courses in culinary arts, rented apartments, a part-time waitressing job, a small catering business run out of her two-bedroom apartment. There was no secret benefactor, no hidden wealth, just a woman working herself to the bone to stay afloat. And then she found it. The details she could twist into a weapon. On the birth certificates for Leo Vance and Maya Vance, the space for father's name was empty. It was left blank. A cruel, triumphant smile spread across Isabel's face. She found Damian on the guest house patio, still reeling from his revelation about Mark. Esther had gone back inside to be with her children. "I think you'll want to see this," Isabel said, her voice dripping with false sympathy as she handed him a tablet displaying the digital copies of the birth certificates. He stared at the empty space where his name should have been. It was another knife in his heart. "She erased you, Damian," Isabel said, softly twisting the blade. "For all her talk of you abandoning them, she made sure you legally didn't exist. She could have put your name down. She could have sued for child support at any time. But she didn't. Why? Maybe she wasn't sure. Maybe there was someone else. A woman doesn't just leave that blank unless she's hiding something." The poison of the suggestion hung in the air. For a fleeting second, the old insecure Damian flickered. Could she be right? Then he looked through the glass door and saw Esther on the floor, helping Maya put a puzzle together, her face a picture of weary, patient love. The woman he knew, the real Esther, would never have been unfaithful. The lie he had believed for 7 years had come from Mark, not her. "No," Damian said, handing the tablet back. "She left it blank because she was protecting them from me, from the man I was. She didn't want her children legally tied to a man who threw their mother away like garbage." Isabel's face hardened. Her gambit had failed. "So that's it. You're just going to blow up your entire life for a woman who has done nothing but struggle and a couple of kids you met yesterday." "They are not a couple of kids," Damian bit out, his voice shaking with a protective fury that was entirely new to him. "They are my son and my daughter. And she is the woman I betrayed because I was a fool who listened to a snake. The only thing I'm blowing up, Isabel, is the lie I've been living." He pulled the 10-carat diamond ring from his pocket, the one he'd retrieved from the platform after the chaos. He didn't hand it to her. He placed it firmly on the patio table between them. "This is over," he said quietly. "Our engagement, our merger, it's over." Isabel stared at the ring, then at his face, her expression a mixture of disbelief and pure hatred. "You will regret this," she whispered, her voice a venomous promise. "I will not be publicly humiliated and discarded. My family will crush you. I will personally tear down everything you have ever built. You think you've seen a scandal? You have no idea what's coming." She turned on her heel and stormed away, a whirlwind of silver silk and shattered ambition. Damian watched her go, but he felt no regret, only a terrifying, liberating clarity. He had just declared war on his own life, his own carefully constructed world. He turned back to the guest house, to the window, where his past, present, and future were all contained in one small, sunlit room. He had to fix this, not by writing a check, but by dismantling the past brick by painful brick and begging for the chance to build something new. His first call would be to his lawyers. His second would be to find Mark Renshaw. The reckoning was just beginning. Damian Blackwood, for the first time in his adult life, ceded control. This wasn't the volatile, reactive anger of a cornered executive. It was a terrifyingly calm surrender to a singular purpose. He didn't storm out to find Mark Renshaw, phone screaming with threats. He didn't issue demands or deploy his usual shock and awe tactics of corporate warfare. Instead, he retreated into the heart of his empire, the two-story library, and turned its resources inward. He acted with the cold, calculating precision he normally reserved for a hostile takeover, but this time the company being dismantled was his own carefully constructed past, and the target was the unvarnished truth. For 48 hours, the library became a war room. He locked himself in with his top two corporate lawyers, a silver-haired, unflappable man named Esther Vance. No relation to Esther, a cruel irony Damian noted, and a sharp young woman named Chen, along with a team of forensic accountants who could find a single misplaced dollar in a sea of transactions. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and fresh coffee. Damian himself didn't speak much. He sat at the head of the massive oak table, his eyes fixed on a bank of monitors, his posture radiating an intensity that made the high-priced professionals around him uneasy. They were used to his commands, his vision, his relentless forward momentum. They were not used to this quiet, methodical excavation of his own history. "We're looking for any and all correspondence between Mark Renshaw and our Series A investors, specifically Arthur Kensington," Damian stated, in the first hour, his voice flat. "Check personal emails, server, backups, everything. I want every contract, every financial statement, every memo from the 3 months leading up to the close of that deal." "May I ask the nature of the inquiry, Damian?" Elias asked cautiously. Damian looked up from his screen, and his eyes were devoid of all emotion. "Mark Renshaw cost me 7 years. I'm here to find out what I paid for it." They worked with a single-minded focus. Hours bled together. Finally, in the dim light of the second night, Chen let out a small gasp. "Sir, I think you need to see this." Damian was at her side in an instant. On the screen was an old archived email chain. The subject line was innocuous, finalizing loose ends. It was between Mark and Arthur Kensington. The men discussed deal points, lawyers' fees, and then a single paragraph from Mark that made the blood freeze in Damian's veins. "And regarding the other matter we discussed, Arthur, rest assured. I'm handling a small personal complication on Damian's end. It will be resolved cleanly and quietly before we close, ensuring no future entanglements or claims on his founder's shares. He'll be fully focused and untethered for the road ahead. No future entanglements. The phrase echoed in the silent room. He wasn't a husband. Esther wasn't his wife. Their love, their shared dreams, their life together, it was a personal complication, a loose end to be snipped. Their marriage had been reduced to a line item on a risk assessment, a problem to be handled by his best friend so that Damian could be untethered. The betrayal was so profound, so complete, it wasn't a stab in the back. It was the slow, deliberate poisoning of the very air he had breathed. He finally understood. Mark hadn't just wanted Esther gone. He had wanted her share of the future, the portion of a founder's equity that would have rightfully been hers in a divorce. He'd sacrificed her for greed. Damian printed the email, his hand steady. He folded the paper and put it in his pocket. "That's all," he said to the room. "Thank you for your work." He then turned to his lawyers. "Elias, prepare a case against Mark Renshaw for fraudulent inducement and breach of fiduciary duty. Spare no expense." While his legal machine whirred to life, Damian turned his attention to a more important task, one no lawyer could handle: atonement. He knew instinctively that grand gestures would be seen as an insult. He couldn't buy his way back into this family. He had to earn it inch by painful inch. He started by observing. He learned from one of the guest house staff that Maya, his quiet, observant daughter, was distraught because her stuffed rabbit Barnaby had lost an eye in the move. That evening, Damian sat alone in the cavernous living room, a place he usually only saw during parties. He had a sewing kit, something the housekeeper had to find for him. His large, capable hands, so used to navigating a keyboard or signing nine-figure deals, were clumsy and awkward with the tiny needle and thread. He stabbed his finger twice, cursing under his breath. But he persisted, spending an entire hour painstakingly stitching a small black coat button onto the worn fabric of the rabbit's face. It was slightly crooked. It didn't quite match the other eye, but it was secure. He left it on the guest house porch before dawn with a simple, handwritten note for Barnaby. He watched his son Leo, a boy with his own determined jaw and a fire in his blue eyes. He saw the child playing for hours with a small set of old, mismatched plastic blocks. The old Damian would have had the most elaborate Lego set on the market delivered within the hour. The new Damian walked down to his personal workshop, a sterile space filled with 3D printers and tech prototypes. He pushed it all aside. He found planks of walnut and maple he'd bought for some forgotten project. He spent the entire day cutting and sanding, the scent of sawdust filling the air. He wasn't building a prototype. He was building a memory. He remembered a set of simple, heavy blocks his own grandfather, a carpenter, had made for him. He remembered the solid feel of them in his hands. He sanded every edge until it was perfectly smooth, rubbing them with natural oil until the grain shone. He left the large, heavy crate of blocks on the patio with no note attached. Esther watched all of this from the windows of the guest house, her heart a confused battlefield. She wanted to hold on to her anger. It was a shield she had carried for 7 years, and it had kept her safe. But every small act, every quiet gesture, was a chisel against that shield. This wasn't the Damian she knew. The Damian she knew outsourced everything. He didn't fix things, he replaced them. This man, this stranger who looked like her husband, was patiently, humbly trying to mend a world he had shattered. One afternoon, she found him by the vineyard's edge, just staring at the rows of grapes, his shoulders slumped. "My lawyers found the emails," he said without turning his voice thick. Between Mark and our first big investor. You were right about everything. He engineered the whole thing. He told me you were a distraction, and he told Kensington you were a complication he was handling. I'm sorry, Damian, she said softly, and the words surprised her with their sincerity. She wasn't sorry he was hurting. She was sorry for the man he had been, the man he'd lost along the way. He finally turned to face her, and his eyes were full of a pain so raw it was startling. Sorry, Esther, don't you dare be sorry for me. I am the one who is sorry. I let my ambition and my fear make me a monster. I let another man poison my mind against the only pure thing in my life. I was weak and arrogant and so desperate to prove myself that I burned down my own home. He took a shaky breath, his gaze drifting toward the guest house where the children were playing. I have wasted 7 years of our lives. But that's not the worst of it. I have wasted 7 years of their lives. I missed their first steps. I missed their first words. I wasn't there to hold them when they had a fever or chase away a nightmare. I can buy anything in this world, Esther, but I can never ever buy back that time. He wasn't making excuses. He was delivering a verdict upon himself. It was in that moment of raw, unvarnished confession, with no attempt to mitigate his guilt, that the final wall inside Esther's heart finally crumbled into dust. No, she said, her own voice thick with unshed tears. You can't buy the time back, but the future. The future isn't written yet. Just as that fragile, tentative truce settled between them, the war with Isabel exploded onto the public stage. As promised, she did not go quietly. A story broke on The Gilded Cage, a notorious gossip website. The headlines screamed across the internet, accompanied by a telephoto shot of Esther and the children on the guesthouse patio. Billionaire CEO Damian Blackwood's secret family fiancé, blindsided by hired help and hidden offspring on eve of engagement. The story was a masterpiece of venom and insinuation. It painted Esther as a calculating gold digger who had timed her reappearance perfectly. It hinted that the paternity of the children was questionable, given the blank father field on the birth certificates. It portrayed Isabel as the dignified, wronged victim. The Blackwood Dynamics stock ticker turned blood red on every news channel. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. Damian's world was officially on fire. The old Damian would have unleashed his PR army, drowning the story in counter-narratives and threatening lawsuits. The new Damian did something entirely different. He called a press conference, not at the sterile headquarters of his company, but on the sun-drenched lawn of his estate. He didn't stand behind a lectern. He stood, simply in an open-collared shirt, in front of the world's media, looking exhausted but resolute. Esther and the children were not there. This was his battle to fight his mess to clean. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady, amplified by a single microphone. "For the past week, you have all been reading a story. And like most stories of its kind, it contains a few facts wrapped in a great many fictions. The fact is, the woman you have seen in pictures, Esther Vance, is my ex-wife. The 2 children, Leo and Maya, are my biological son and daughter. I have the paternity test results to prove it, though I have never needed them." A wave of murmurs and frantic typing went through the press call. "The fiction," he continued, his voice rising with a passion that silenced the crowd, "is that she is some kind of opportunist who appeared out of nowhere. The truth is that she is a hero who I failed in every way a man can fail a woman. 7 years ago, due to my own failings, my own weakness, and the deliberate manipulations of others, I ended our marriage in the cruelest way imaginable. I abandoned her. I paid her to disappear. I did not know she was pregnant because I did not deserve to know. I was not a man worthy of being a father. He laid it all bare. The check, the lies, his blind ambition. He took full, devastating responsibility. Esther Vance never asked me for a penny, he said, his voice finally cracking with emotion. She worked, she struggled, and she raised two beautiful, intelligent, wonderful children on her own, protecting them from a world that she had every right to be bitter against. The failure in this story is not hers. The shame is not hers. It is mine and mine alone. He paused, taking a deep breath and looking directly into the sea of cameras. He then addressed the business world. My integrity is not just a personal matter, it is the bedrock of my company. A legacy built on lies is no legacy at all. Therefore, as of this morning, I have voluntarily placed a 51% controlling interest of my shares in Blackwood Dynamics into an irrevocable trust for my children to be managed by an independent trustee until they are of age. I have also filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against Mark Renshaw for his role in these events. And finally, I have broken off my engagement to Isabel Sterling. He didn't take any questions. He simply finished speaking and walked back into his house, leaving the world to digest the stunning, brutal honesty of his confession. That evening, the air was cool and quiet. He found Esther and the children on the patio of the guest house. Leo was on the ground, proudly showing him the tall, intricate fortress he had built with the new wooden blocks. Maya was asleep on her mother's lap, Barnaby the rabbit, with his new, slightly crooked button eye, clutched to her chest. Damian didn't say a word. He just sat down on the steps a few feet away watching them. He was a man, stripped of his pride, his public image in tatters, his company no longer solely his future a terrifying blank, and yet the hollow space in his chest was gone. For the first time in 7 years, it was filled with something else. It was filled with a fragile, terrifying, and overwhelming sense of hope. Esther looked over at him, the setting sun casting a warm, forgiving glow on his face. She saw the boy she had fallen in love with, the fool he had become, and the man he was desperately trying to be. She offered him a small, tentative smile. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't a promise. It was a beginning. And for Damian Blackwood, it was worth more than his entire empire. In the end, Damian Blackwood's greatest merger had nothing to do with business. It was the merger of his past and his future. He lost a fiancée, a fortune, and the flawless reputation he'd fought so hard to build. But in its place, he found something real, a chance at redemption, and the family he never knew he had. The journey to rebuild that trust would be long and difficult, but for the first time, the billionaire felt truly rich. What would you have done in his shoes? Can a mistake that big ever truly be forgiven? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of love, betrayal, and second chances moved you, please give this video a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable real-life dramas. Share this with someone who loves a story that proves it's never too late to right a terrible wrong.